Hello, welcome back. And this is the second part of our lecture about cognitive metaphors and legal concepts. In this part, I will try to describe why metaphor theory can really be used in explaining legal concepts and what are the limitations of this approach. Let me just go back to what we discussed in the first part of the lecture. Because it is important to understand what really this conceptual metaphor theory can tell us about legal concepts. Because you already know that some abstract concepts can be treated as metaphors, and that in our ordinary language, but also in our legal language, we can find many examples of expressions that suggest that our thinking about abstract objects is really metaphorical. And I have already mentioned this example to break the law, but for instance, there is also to bend the law metaphor. And all these expressions are manifestations of the basic metaphor of law as a physical object. Of course, law can be a specific object, for example, a fragile object that can be broken. So it's not just an object, it's an object which has a specific features. Another example, the concept of crime, and a compelling experiment concerning the role of metaphor in processing this concept, crime, was conducted by Lara Broditsky and her colleague 12 years ago. And this is an experiment that I don't want to go into details now, but it's a very, very nice experiment that shows that metaphor really can influence our ways of thinking. But if metaphor is something that allows us to think about abstract objects, if it allows us to process abstract concepts, then it's no surprise that it influences our decisions, our beliefs, and so on. Please, if you are interested, just find this paper, and I think that it can be really, and reading this paper can be really valuable for all of you. Another example of metaphors, and perhaps this is the best, in my personal opinion, this is the best example of legal metaphors, is all this category of metaphors that are called hierarchical metaphors or orientational metaphors, like more is up or power is up. And I mentioned that the highest court is highest, not in the sense of the size of the building or the size of the judges. Rather, it is highest. That means that it's the most important court in a country. Another example, the highest legal act, constitution, doesn't mean that I don't know what it could mean in a literal sense, but metaphorically it means that this is the most important legal act, and that other legal acts cannot contain legal norms that are contradictory to the legal norms that are expressed in legal rules that are expressed in the Constitution. So the legal system consists of norms that are lower and higher in a metaphorical sense, of course, not in a literal sense. The lower norms must be consistent with the higher ones. And please note that this metaphor, this hierarchical metaphor, shapes our thinking about the society. We have middle class, high class, lower class, and so on. Some people are higher in the social hierarchy, some of them are lower, and so on. This metaphor is really a really embodied metaphor, because please note that our head is on the top of our body. And we think that the head is the most important part of our body because our brain is located in our heads. So also, if something is higher, that then in a literal sense, in a bodily sense, it can be dangerous for us. Because if someone is higher, this person can, I don't know, just take a stone and throw this stone, and we can be injured. So this is a very basic kind of interaction. Anyone can imagine this kind of interaction. I hope no one experiences this this kind of interaction in real life, but I think you can see what it is all about. There are some basic interactions, some basic schemes of our experience that influence our way of thinking and also influence our abstract cognition. And that's why metaphors and conceptual metaphor theory is really important if we want to understand how legal mind works and how what are the processes that lie behind legal cognition. Because if you want to understand the process of legal interpretation, the process of legal decision making, then we really need to understand the basic mental processes. And conceptual processing is one of the basic mental, basic cognitive processes. So if we have no theory about legal concepts, then I am not sure if we can have a reliable theory, for instance, concerning legal decision making. But let's go back to our main topic today, metaphor theory. And I hope that now you have you got a general idea of conceptual metaphor, that we have a concrete domain, an abstract domain, and metaphor allows us to think about abstract objects in terms of concrete objects. So we use something from the concrete domain, and this allows us to think about the abstract domain. We understand what it means that there is a hierarchy of legal norms, because we know what it means that something is more important, and if something is higher, then it's something that's more important. We understand what law is because we perfectly understand what a material object is, and we know what it means to break something, and then we can understand what it means to break the law, not to obey a certain legal rule, legal obligation. But it is not the case that we can say law is metaphorical. Legal concepts are conceptual metaphors. I don't think this case is so simple. It is rather a hard case. And now I want to explain why, and why it would be a simplification to say that law is metaphorical and that abstract legal concepts, because please remember that we are talking about abstract concepts, not concrete concepts, that abstract legal concepts are just metaphors. Even if they are metaphors, I think we need to explain what kind of metaphor a specific legal concept is. And please let me briefly introduce a typology of metaphorical legal concepts. which, in my opinion, can be really helpful if we want to understand the role of conceptual metaphor theory in our studies concerning legal concepts. So the first dichotomy is implicit and explicit metaphors. What does it mean? If we have implicit metaphor or implicit metaphorical mapping, this process of transferring inferential scheme from the concrete to the abstract domain, then the source concept, so this concrete concept, is not visible in the linguistic expressions concerning certain objects. So if we, for instance, if we have this phrase "to break the law," we cannot see this metaphor that law is a physical object. Sorry. If we think about crime in terms of I don't know, infection, yeah, that the crime rate is increasing and people are inflicted, people that the crime is let's say kind of illness, then we cannot see. I refer now to this experiment that I just mentioned, experiment conducted by Lara Boroditsky and her colleague. So please, again, feel free to find this paper and read more about this. But in this case, we have no clue, direct clue, what this metaphor looks like. And this is perhaps fully unconscious mapping. So one important thing, according to conceptual metaphor theory, conceptual mapping is unconscious. We are not aware that we use conceptual metaphors when we think about abstract entities. And this form of mapping is perhaps the basic form of mapping, and this is something that can be called fully unconscious mapping. But this is not, and this is something that Lakoff and Johnson described as a typical form of mapping. So we are not aware, and we need a specific form of analysis to be able to recognize these metaphors that are present in our language and in our ways of thinking. Another form of metaphor in this context is explicit metaphor. And so the source concept is visible in the linguistic expressions. And one example, or two examples perhaps, intellectual property that I have already mentioned, because in this word, this name contains the direct reference to the source concept, namely property. And another example, higher court, because here we have this this word high, or in the form of higher, and we can easily notice the metaphor that lies behind these expressions. So these are two forms of metaphors: implicit metaphors, which are perhaps this is perhaps a dominant form of metaphor, but we also have explicit metaphors, which are quite untypical but also very important. Another distinction, perhaps the most important in the context of contemporary discussions within the cognitive sciences: strong and weak metaphors. And strong and weak in this context means strong and weak embodiment. In the first part, I briefly introduced the idea of embodied cognition, and now very briefly too about weak and strong embodied cognition. According to strong embodied cognition, with a broad brush again, all our cognitive processes are based on strong mental simulations that are directly linked to our experiences and that are based on our perceptual data that we receive, perceptual information. According to weak embodied cognition, there is also room for amodal representations. What's the difference between modal and amodal? Modal representations are these representations that are directly linked to different modalities, namely our perceptual experiences, our perceptual information. Amodal means that something is not linked to perceptual information. For instance, language is amodal. If we have a word cat, this word cat composed, we have three letters, C-A-T. This word is absolutely not similar to cats, to living cats. And so here we have amodality. This is, of course, a part of a broader discussion about the nature of mental representations. And if we think about this distinction, modal, amodal, it is, of course, important to remember about the discussion between the so-called classical theory of cognition or classical theories of cognition and embodied approach. And again, I think that paper written by Lawrence Barsalou, grounded cognition, can be a good introduction to this topic for many of you. But to sum up, if we have amodal representations, then we have representations that are not directly grounded in our experiences. If we have modal representations, then they are grounded directly in our experiences. And according to strong embodiment, all representations are directly linked to our experiences. According to weak embodiment, not necessarily all, and perhaps not all. There is a room for amodal representations, but generally speaking, our cognition is embodied. And why is it important for metaphor theory? Because if we accept the strong view, the strong embodiment, all metaphors must be linked to directly embodied concepts, concrete concepts. And if we accept the weak embodiment, we also have metaphors that are not directly linked to perceptual concepts, but also to less abstract concepts. And one example is intellectual property again. If we agree that this is a metaphor, then this metaphor is based on an abstract concept of property and is more abstract metaphor based on abstract concept. And a strong kind of metaphor is, for instance, a metaphor that law is a material object. And the last distinction, inferential and mimetic. Inferential metaphors are these typical metaphors that are based on mapping, on transferring the inferential schemes, and mimetic metaphors are not exactly based on this form of mapping, but are rather grounded in a certain form of similarity between something that is natural, something that exists in the world, and our abstract creations. So there is also one important thing, that there are also abstract legal concepts that seem not to be metaphorical. And the most important part and the most important thing that I hope you will remember is that there is no just one type of conceptual metaphors if in law. Mapping, metaphorical mapping, is a multidimensional phenomenon and even not universal mechanism. If we want to understand abstract legal concepts, yes, we should use conceptual metaphor theory, and it can really help us. But we should remember that the explanatory power of this theory is limited, and that perhaps we also need to remember about other theories that are currently developed. For instance, hybrid theories and theories that also accept some forms of amodal representation that are not directly embodied, and even metaphors that are not directly embodied. But that's all for today. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that this very brief introduction was a good introduction, so that you are interested in learning, in studying conceptual metaphors in legal context. Thank you very much.